Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Urban AI panel. Thank you all for being here. My name is Snoweria. I'll be moderating this panel. I'm also part of the faculty in the CDP program. So today with us, we have Christopher Munsell of GSAPP and APRE Consulting. We have Nneka Sobers, who is with New York City Innovation Team, and she was just telling us about how all of her work on child poverty is in progress, so she can tell us all about how AI is going to help with that. We also have Vanky, who is our very own at GSAPP, and then last but not least, we have Sarah Williams from MIT. So we'll go through the presentations in that order. The panelists feel free to take a seat. Of course, I'm sure you'll want to see each other's presentations. And so one last thing that I'll just remind everybody in the audience is that you see the QR codes that are taped on the walls everywhere in the auditorium. If you would like to submit a question, feel free to scan the QR code and we'll read them out loud in the Q&A section in the end. So the framing question for this panel is, can AI learn urban intelligence? So I'm really excited to hear how all of our panelists will talk about that topic. Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Munsell. I'm the Glasscock Associate Professor here at GSAPP. I teach the core real estate finance curriculum in the MSRED program. And I wanted to take a minute today to get everyone from the audience involved. Anyone who's been in my class knows that I do a lot of active polling to try to get the audience involved. So first, the question I'm going to start off with today, and you can use this QR code here if you want to text a number. I know some of the cell phone reception isn't great here, so if you use this QR code, it'll just send you to the URL, and at the URL, it'll ask you to register. You can just click skip, and then skip on the following prompt, and then just select one of the options, and we'll be able to share the answers with you in a second. But when we talk about AI, I think there's a lot of optimism around its capability. I think one thing that we don't think about is how we interact with things on a day-to-day basis. So the question I'm proposing to you is, when you do, everyone here has used customer service in some way at some point. You know, you call the pharmacy to see whether your prescription's ready, you're ordering Uber Eats or Seamless, there's an issue that comes up with the order, and you're using the chatbot there. In any of those circumstances, or a similar set of circumstance, you know, do you prefer to speak with someone on the phone, or do you prefer to use the automated chatbot? So we got about 12, 14 so far. We'll see where the data's going. So right now, about 3/4 of you prefer to use a human. Yet, if you were to ask most folks what they think about AI and its capability, a lot of people, when they have the opportunity, will want to load things off on technology. And one thing that I'm going to reiterate a lot today is that while AI has tremendous capability to solve and address certain issues, it has one major shortfall. And that shortfall is that artificial intelligence itself will never be human. And so many of us, when we look at either data sets or interact with technology, all of these circumstances don't properly identify the human need or the human touch. So I conducted a study in my course last year. I have about between 120, 130 students. We had about 80 participants in this study. And one of the major learning objectives of the second core finance course in the MSRED program is structured around what's called the joint venture waterfall. It essentially determines the distribution of profits between a real estate developer and its investors. It's a series of complex calculations, but in a way is very standardized throughout the industry. It's a key learning objective. Everyone needs to learn it. So there's a lot of existing data and online available resources how to use it. We took a mixed methods approach. We wanted to understand both the quantitative and the qualitative outputs of the study. So we gave students a typical homework assignment. One set of students got to be in the classroom and receive 2 hours of traditional instruction. They could not use any other outside resources. Another group of students did not attend the in-person instruction, but they were allowed to use ChatGPT in an unlimited fashion for up to a week. So long as they were willing to, continue to solicit its help, they could use it for 30, 40, 50 hours, whatever it took to get the assignment done. And sort of in my hypothesis that I did along with my co-PI, Dr. Victoria Melania Brown, who's the Director of Academic Integrity at Columbia, we sort of thought that because students have this unlimited aid, that they'd probably be able to do the homework as well as the students who received instruction, traditional classroom instruction, or potentially even better. Because the students, they only had 2 hours in the classroom and then they had to apply their knowledge, versus the students who could use this when it was right for them in the upcoming weekend assignment. And what we found was that the students who used ChatGPT performed about a little more than 12% worse on the homework assignment. And what was really, really convincing was that I took a set of the exam that addresses the same learning objective, the application of the theoretical concepts from the homework. And both sets of students took the same learning assessment in the same environment. And the students who used ChatGPT performed about 26% worse. And that was one part of my hypothesis that I felt was going to be correct. And it was based on my previous instructional experience. We used Microsoft Excel in the MSRED program in at least half of the courses, almost all of the financial courses. And what I found after a few years is we stopped teaching the algebraic math of the calculations in Excel. Hey, why are we going to spend time detailing out all these processes, when you can just use this computer to just do it for you? And one of the key skills that you develop in the industry is being able to look at data like a financial model and point out, hey, I think this number's wrong. This number doesn't make sense. And after just teaching Excel, I found that students would hand in work or present work, and they had such faith in the technology, they couldn't identify any mistakes. To any seasoned professional, they'd look at one output and say, well, that's obviously incorrect. But to students who didn't have the industry experience, who didn't understand what Excel was doing, they weren't able to identify and interpret incorrect data. So we went back to teaching the algebraic math in the program, and then once you teach students the sort of long form method, you say, hey, here are the shortcuts to use this process. And I felt great about the last panel discussion because it talked about, when you're using AI, taking time to open it up and look under the hood, to understand what it's doing. And so when we apply AI, as I think about it in an urban context, is real estate investors and developers who have almost a daily interaction with government. I think that we look at AI, especially in regards to data, as we have an obsession with data, definitely within academia and within the practice today, right? We have the Data Sciences Institute. We have an ever-evolving curriculum based on any integration of data within industry. And the thing is, I think in our obsession with data, right, we're not spending the time really examining and applying the same relentless rigor that you should to how data is collected, how it's examined, and the possible opportunities and pitfalls. And I think that while we can have AI make much of our day-to-day lives much more efficient, it can do calculations a lot faster than humans can. It's very efficient in organizing and aggregating data. But it's when we divorce ourselves from examining the data, understanding how AI drew its conclusions to any sort of sets of inputs, and we start to rely on it. Oh, well, the computer said this, so it must be right. And that, I think, is my ultimate fear in this, because when I think of sort of about, sort of how I would put this all together, is that my fear is not, what data might be excluded or might be included. but oftentimes the result. Because within the urban environment, within government, especially within economics and real estate, you know, we need to understand a lot of demographic information. And as we use more and more integrated, sophisticated, and autonomous technologies, we run the risk of ignoring the pockets in the areas that the data is not going to correctly analyze. And so I think I had here in a point, it said, the concern is not, you know, what it might exclude or include, but more importantly, who it might exclude. Because that data, especially as we think about government, and we think about policy, and we think about the objectives we want to achieve in the built environment, real estate in design is all built around the individual, the user, right? The people everything goes towards the user experience. Real estate is 100% a function of the people who use it. The way our office space functions and is designed is based on how people live and work. The same with our apartment spaces. As those needs change, especially if more people are working from home, less time in the office, the design and layout of the spaces that they live in is going to change. And so if we don't understand what the data is telling us and really pursuing a relentless interrogation, we run the risk of making a lot of mistakes. And what I've always found in my professional career is that as great as some technologies can be, there is no replacement for human capital. And there was an interview the CEO of LinkedIn did recently. He was talking about his daughter and her friends who are of college age, and they were asking what we should study. And he had a few points to say there, but one is learning how to learn. My ultimate fear as an instructor, especially as we have more external resources that we can rely on, is that students will no longer be interested in the acquisition of knowledge. Hey, I want to understand the output of what I need to know. Why do I need to understand how the system works? And I think that when we don't develop this skill, we lose a certain amount of emotional intelligence, our ability to identify and understand with different populations and different perspectives. And ultimately what makes you successful, I think, is your ability to work with others and understand others who are not like you or come from different backgrounds or have different ideas. Because when we can all speak, collaborate, and agree on things, we can affect change. So I sort of wanted to wrap this up and say that I think that too often we ask these sort of systems for, hey, what can AI tell us? And I sort of reframe that to say, let's ask AI to do things we know how to do. Let's have them automate a process that's slow, that we understand and we can do ourselves. And for the processes that we don't necessarily know how to do, let's at least, if you're still gonna ask AI to do it, let's make sure that you can take your own approach and understand it. Because I think when we start to let these technologies do our own predictions for us, where we set ourselves up to, you know, make larger assumptions and larger mistakes about the population.
Hi everyone, my name is Nneka and I'm the Deputy Director of New York City's New Innovation Team, which sits inside of the Mayor's office. But beyond my current role, my background's actually in urban planning and in civic technology development. So when posed with the question, can AI learn urban intelligence? I'm like, yes, I can't wait to talk about all the cool technology that us government folks are procuring or trying to develop. But actually, as I started thinking about this question more, I started feeling tension around the word intelligence. Like it just was sticking with me in a way that I wanted to unpack, rather than focus on shiny procured technology. So when we think about AI and urban intelligence, we think about technology that prioritizes efficiency and optimization of how our cities work. You know, think about tools that actually manage traffic flow, energy distribution, or does predictive modeling for improving our bridges and buildings. So this type of intelligence is very important, but is it all that defines our cities? You know, think about when you were traveling to this building, when you were walking here today. Were you thinking, oh, New York, the way that your traffic's managed, so inspiring? Probably not. You know, when you think about the pulse of the city, you're probably thinking about its people. their lived experiences, the decisions that they have made to make this city what it is. So leveraging AI to make our cities smarter and more efficient is actually not the full picture of what urban intelligence is. Urban intelligence is also derived from people's negotiations over space, resources, values. And I argue that civic engagement and participation is the foundation of urban intelligence. When residents participate in decision-making, whether it's through neighborhood priorities or influencing policy, they are actually creating a collective urban intelligence that can't be captured through an efficiency lens. Sorry about that. So it's through this process that our cities adapt and evolve in ways that resonate with the people that actually are the folks who are shaping the city. So understanding civic engagement as the foundation of urban intelligence and how exploring technology relates to this kind of urban intelligence is actually the core of all of my work. More specifically, my practice comes from my urban planning background. Shout out to some of my former professors here. As well as my time leading product development teams, design research teams. But no matter what discipline I move through, I keep coming back to this question of how can city makers leverage technology to shape city systems that center marginalized experiences. Actually, in fact, this image here is a photo of an art piece that I've made, but that's for a different talk. But I do think it's a really beautiful metaphor of how I actually use technology as a medium to really interrogate this question of who is a city maker and how do city makers shape urban intelligence. So in this question, there's a few key words I want to point out here. The first word is city maker, which is inspired by Catchum Seppard's work. But city makers aren't just government officials. They're not just planners and developers. They're residents, organizers, and advocates. And it's especially those people whose voices are often missing from these conversations or not taken seriously that we need to center. And this historically usually falls on BIPOC and low-income communities that are usually rendered invisible in this process. So another key word is the word shape. And this term is also expanding about who holds decision-making power and who gets to influence how we're defining our collective urban intelligence. So the reason why this question is so important to me and why it's really important to the work that we do is because it's connected to two important principles: civic trust and technological justice. So civic trust is more than just transparency. It's about creating systems that genuinely respect and reflect the community. So today we see too many instances where technology is used in ways that erode trust, from data collection being done without informed consent, or decisions being made by a black box, whether that's opaque governance or it could just be privatized algorithms. But as Ben Green's book highlights, The Smart Enough City, this approach to technology creates power asymmetries that often place governments and private companies in positions of unchecked influence over the lives of residents. And there are very few avenues for real accountability when that happens. So when we focus only on efficiency as an efficiency aspect of urban intelligence, we risk creating a smart city that entrenches these divides and makes decision-making opaque, as well as widening the gulf between those who make decisions and then everyone else. So in addition to civic trust, we must prioritize technological justice, which is a principle that ensures that our technology works to undo rather than reinforce bias. So technological justice demands that we recognize and counteract the biases that exist in the development and the applications of AI and data-driven decision-making. So in Rua Benjamin's book, A Race After Technology, she talks about the need for abolitionist tools that can dismantle structural inequities embedded in technology and the decisions we make using that tech. So to achieve technological justice, we must ensure that underrepresented communities are actively engaged in decision-making, as well as defining the problems they want to focus on in the first place. So now that we understand what's at stake if we do not prioritize this kind of human-centered urban intelligence or expand our notions of who gets to shape that intelligence, it really comes down to trying to unlock this intelligence in the first place. But we know that getting this intelligence is hard. It doesn't matter how inclusive we try to make our civic engagement. I know lots of folks who've done this work and tried to bring in feedback into their design process know how difficult it is to get really meaningful feedback from folks. So in my experience in government and academia and private sector, these are some of the 3 key barriers that I keep coming into in my work on why it's so hard to unlock urban intelligence. So my favorite reason, which is kind of odd to say, but government is frustratingly difficult to navigate. So the back end of government isn't actually quite organized in a way that someone who isn't in government would understand. Let's say you want your sidewalk fixed on your block. You might think, I should call government about that. Which part of government? Yes, we have really great tools like 311 where you can submit service requests, but service requests may touch different government departments that have their own protocols and their capacity. Also, submitting a service request is actually not a transformative type of civic engagement. It's a customer service line for government. So it's not the space to actually talk about really large, complex social issues that really matter to you. But don't get me wrong, 311 isn't bad, but let's not get that confused with transformative civic action. Also, too, there was a talk earlier today, I don't know how many of you went to see his work, but Nikhil Garg also demonstrates in his research that when it comes to 311 calls, it's actually usually wealthier folks that actually are more vocal on what they want done. So actually, even using 311 as a proxy for civic action actually misses the big picture of what other people who aren't submitting to 311 think about and care about. So the second challenge is in uncovering urban intelligence is limited feedback. So there are many brilliant civic engagement experts that are working in government or working with government in their own design practices, but sometimes civic engagement happens way too late in the process. And when I say way too late, I mean that the problem has already been defined, or when you're opening up opportunities for feedback, the solution has actually kind of been in place and you want feedback on that specific solution. So this is what creates that feeling a lot of us might have that, my feedback doesn't matter because it just might be tokenized. And also the third point that I want to make around why it's so hard to uncover urban intelligence is even if you actually participate in civic engagement, that you're brought in early, it feels inclusive, you're submitting that 311 service request, a challenge is that you may not be able to see the outcomes of your input. And this is kind of related to my first point of government being complicated. It actually might take months or years for government to get its coins together to actually act on the feedback that you provided. Also, too, relationships between government departments really matter. And also, we keep seeing that a lot of key decisions are really made by a smaller group of people. So that's why it's important to open that up. So these are the reasons of why people are skeptical about feeling that their ideas will actually be reflected in our urban intelligence. And it is at this level where I think that creatively applying AI could be an opportunity. So AI can really help us maybe overcome these 3 obstacles of getting the urban intelligence that we need to increase civic trust and technological justice. So imagine if AI could help us address these very challenges of simplifying complex systems, inviting in early civic participation, and building more transparent feedback loops. Imagine a world where AI can overcome the government labyrinth problem by being used as a government navigation assistant, guiding you to the right department and contacts for the very specific request. And also, maybe it can help on the back end streamline government complexity as well as making sure departments are aligned and not duplicating work. So imagine a world where AI can enable you to shape city priorities, where you can be brought in from the start, where you can offer early stage input, even in the problem definition phase. And then you can imagine a world too, where you can start analyzing trade-offs between the decisions you want to make about your community and your space, and compare it to actually what's even possible or what other people think in the city. Now too, you can imagine a world where AI can actually even be your window into civic accountability, tracking real-time updates about how your feedback directly shapes decisions and keeping you informed about outcomes. Fostering that clear communication between your input and your feedback and then real world change. So I feel hopeful about AI only if we are identifying the right problems to solve. If we believe in the power of AI to learn urban intelligence, we need to firstly expand what intelligence we prioritize in the first place, and then really think about who gets to shape that intelligence. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's ironic. This is like the week of AI for me because in my own urban data informatics class, we talked about algorithmic governance on Tuesday. Yesterday, there was a session with the government of Ho Chi Minh City at the policy school, and we talked about urban artificial intelligence, and it's nice to have that conversation here as well. So just weird coincidence. But I want to start with like the naive kind of diagram of AI. This is like the AI or ML 101 diagram of what happens with the black box, that you have data coming in, and then you also have some training data which represent the outcomes, and then magic, something happens, we don't know, shrug of the shoulders, a lot of math, cool things, and rules come out for what happens next. And then the context in this case, the context window if we're talking about AI, or like the LLMs, or in this case, urbanism. And I'm actually going to structure my talk around these different parts to think about what urban intelligence is. The irony for those who are close to me, the one section that's not highlighted is data, which is actually where most of my work is. So I'm not actually going to talk about like 75% of the research that I do to really kind of focus on this. It may come up in discussions, but. So let's start with the context, urbanism. Really blurry, sorry. Also old video, but a lot of you who have, if we've talked, know that I find incredible inspiration from Holly White, William H. White's work, The Social Life of Small Urban Spaces, in documenting through a sociological lens how people use urban space. My favorite finding from the study is how before people sit down, everyone just kind of wants to nudge the chair a little bit, right? To just kind of claim your space. Maybe it's a defensive posture, maybe it's a cultural thing, maybe it's something from our primate brain. But that we want to claim our space as our own, which helped Bryant Park, and the Conservancy really buy into the idea of having chairs out there that you can move, right? That you can make your own space, and that becomes kind of one of the great urban spaces of New York. So in my old office, thinking about Holly White, I would look out the window, and this is now Lola Benalon's office, and just look at the nature of sitting, and just where people sit in this space, Avery Plaza, and thinking about the context of Bryant Park. In the era of Holly White, he used the best computation available, Super 8 cameras, and a lot of volunteers who manually annotated the videos. And my thinking and reflection about that, in the urban case, as urbanists, we don't want to identify that someone's sitting. We want to identify that someone did that, or what they're doing when they're sitting. Yet, the tools that we have available to us, if we're to run any type of identification, this is the type of stuff we get. So this is from a project that I did a couple years ago before AI, LLMs blew up. And we just wanted to naively see what the libraries out there tell us. So from the pictures above found from open source, sources out there, if we were to identify it, it would be the narrative description. And we asked also really great computing power to help us, volunteer graduate students, to just kind of tell us what you see in the image, right? And they're not surprising. The first one, people talking with coffee. I love the second one, people individually looking at their phones, right? That's what they're doing. You know, and then really sad, like the last one, person eating alone, especially after we looked at people eating ice cream together. Those are very social, humane, human-centered descriptions. But when we run it into the algorithms, right, what are they identifying, which is that second row there, and then we forced it to give us a narrative based on what it saw, give us a sentence. So people bench outside, not too bad, right? But I think we actually lose some of the nuances of urbanism, right? People bench, okay, not so bad, but instead of ice cream, we have man, finger outside, and really sad, man-child, sidewalk. And I think this is the problem when we think about the context of urbanism and thinking about what that intelligence is that we're looking for within the urban context, right? Perhaps if I'm just wanting to look at naive kind of descriptions of generally what people are doing, maybe the algorithms are good enough, the artificial intelligence. But what is lacking within the context of urbanism is that, the premise of this session, the urban intelligence. So let me pivot to the next section to think about outcomes. And how do we begin to think about, especially in urban planning, the kind of disciplinary house in which I reside here at GSAPP, how do we think about urban questions? And the thing I hate the most, and my students, if you're in the class, you know my rant about this. I hate computer vision segmentation. I really hate it. Because I have been in enough sessions where the question that is being asked of this is, what physical attributes of the built environment are related to walking? And many of the images are coming from Street View. When was the last time you walked down the middle of the street? I mean, some of you in this, like Sunday I will be with the marathon, but outside of this one weird case, you walk on the sidewalk, not where the Google Street View vehicle goes. So there's a fundamental mismatch between what we can do with the technology and what we're actually asking within an urban context. So to reframe this, and I don't know if Tim's still here or Kisang, if you're here, they're helping me with this project. So this is research in motion that we're struggling through right now. But this project looks at the condition of southeastern Michigan, the metro area around Detroit, the Tri-County area, which is kind of this ugly box, a little shifted. But what you're seeing kind of in the blue blobs is the census counts from 1880 to 2010, specifically the count of Asian and Asian Americans. And the important part to see is that sometimes there's no data. That's why things just go flat. That systemically, how the US government has measured populations has purposefully erased the presence of people of Asian descent, either as immigrants or as residents living here, as a matter of policy. And when we look at the census from 2010, if you live in the area, one of the fastest growing population groups are Asian and Asian Americans. But the migration patterns and the settlement patterns of this population in the late 20th and 21st century is radically different than we've seen before. There is no traditional Chinatown, which I'll talk about in just a second, but that people now live in the suburbs, and the settlement patterns are different. But we know that this is a fast-growing population, yet, on the top box, if you can identify a cluster of Asian and Asian Americans, I'd be incredibly impressed, right? You don't see it. So to discuss this issue of erasure, how do we find the inscriptions of a population that we know is growing? The settlement patterns are different, let alone not just in the case of an American suburb, but an American suburb in the Midwest, which is a story that has not been well documented in sociology, in urban history, especially when the legacy of Detroit is this. This is the last remaining marker that reflects the downtown Detroit Chinatown that was, for a variety of historically racist reasons, has been disinvested in and is now gone, to the point where in the middle of the night, one of the most historic buildings for this community was destroyed. So this is, see, I don't know if the video will play. Can you click on the image, see if it works? Maybe the video died. Nope. Okay. So this, we'd be driving through using Street View, southeastern Michigan, if this was working. And our question was, how do we use as an archive this as a way to identify this emerging population? So as a discrete analogy, with the archive of Google Street View, this is one shopping center that has emerged over the past 5 years. And the interesting part is this store right here, which in 2019 was a Cricket Mobile, but yet now is a Asian-owned business. That now it's a 10-second rice noodles, I think is the translation of it. So this, as a database, used opportunistically, allows us to kind of get a sense of population change if we know where to look. As a more discrete case, it's not just enough to look at restaurants or kind of specific businesses that we know. But this, a market, if you look in traditional data sets, the points of interest, or you look at official business records, would be very difficult to understand as an ethnic amenity business. But if you look at the specific text in the window, which we wouldn't have in that, you're seeing Bengali or Bangla, depending on how you describe it. If this business has that language, it's perhaps serving a Bangladeshi, Bangla community. So we're opportunistically looking at these signs in the space to use it as kind of an indicator of population change. So this is kind of some of the work that we're looking at now. Shout outs to Hao Chan, who's a graduate of the CDB program. We spent, this project's been going on for a while. We've used so William had talked about the POM with models. We use all these different tools, and then Hao Chan was like, oh yeah, there's a new language tool from Google. Why don't you just use that? Saved us so much time. We went through so many different libraries and tools, and now speeding up our process. But these are two communities, Troy and Sterling Heights. Just to give you a sense for you New Yorkers, this area is about the size of Brooklyn. And we're just talking about two businesses. So first, how do we identify the clusters? And then how do we look at the propensity of the different languages? Red being East Asian languages, green being Arabic. And you can see kind of what it looks like at a finer grain. So incredible scale that we're looking at. And just to validate, we're also looking at areas where we know there has been well-documented population change. So Dearborn, Michigan, America's first Arab majority city, also looking at how well our tools work in looking at Arabic. So we're now kind of looking at this at scale. So as I said, research in motion, but it is seemingly promising. One of the challenges, though, for us philosophically is, especially in the idea of assimilation in the American story, how do you document things like numbers? A lot of Asian businesses use numbers. Well, that's not Chinese, that's not Korean. And how do we valorize that, especially when one of the businesses we're talking about is 168 Market, that's its name. Or in Dearborn, the term cedar tree, which is written in English terms, but has a cultural meaning for the Lebanese community. So we're also grappling with philosophical kind of discussions of, yes, we're identifying language, but even in English, they may be loaded culturally. And how do we begin to weigh that within a library where we don't have a ready-made list of the most culturally important terms to Lebanese people in Arabic, right? So let me quickly talk about rules, and I know I'm starting to run short on time. Because I think the one aspect of urbanism is that we like to blame algorithms and these big platform companies and all these parties a lot. But it's not the algorithm that decides to harm individuals. It's people in power who harm people using these tools. And in a previous life when I was at the University of Michigan, we were trying to engage with this conversation, right, about ethical issues. And it also now falls into gray areas, whereas a simple project, we were referred to from IRB to the Director of Privacy and IT Policy and General Counsel as a way of engaging in research, because we want to talk about this issue, right? We know these cameras, this one being here, this one being in Detroit, particularly the gaze of these little cameras that look at us here and here. So in Detroit, there is a program called Project Greenlight. which is a project from the Detroit Police Department in collaboration with businesses that want to participate. So businesses will pay to feed their real-time security videos to a database set up by the Detroit Police Department, and all of those images are processed to help prevent crime. The name comes from, and this is a little nice Mies van der Rohe complex, some of you, since I'm in an architecture setting. And the name comes from the fact that all businesses have to have a green light to denote where it is. And Rebecca Smith at the University of Michigan looked at the spatiality of it, right? The gaze of the camera versus where the light is visible and there's a mismatch. So we can even talk about this idea of transparency not working. But that, as I said, this video is going to DPD. They run your images through a database of individuals who have warrants out for their arrest, and lo and behold, people are arrested. But we know that there are biases in the technology. That NIST did a study finding that black males are 10 to 100 times more likely to have false positives, leading to the first false arrest of Mr. Williams, Robert Julian Borek Williams, the first person falsely arrested, and recently his trial against Detroit Police Department, a lawsuit, he was successful in that case. But there's some challenges, right? There's a conversation about safety, and there's a conversation about privacy. And just engaging in that process and why I had to deal with lawyers, I wanted to have a conversation. So I'll say that this might be triggering if you have gender dysphoria. I'm going to talk about things in a very cold way, and I'll explain why, but just as a note. So during the pandemic, my colleague and I, Brian Boyer, wanted to just do a quick and dirty installation to have this conversation, to really anchor what the conversation of urban technology is in this city. So also say we did this during the pandemic, so the team actually never met with each other until we put it up. So literally the heat of the summer of 2020, we were doing this. So we had this cute and coy little thing, looking at your face, your affect, we'll put a little emoji and happy things happen. But on the inside, we had a much darker story, that we were actually using facial recognition, much like Detroit PD does, a little less advanced. And we read your affect, and then we assign your age based on marketing standards, your gender, male or female only, and your emotions, and we display it. And then what happens, it gets promoted on the front, right? But in some cases, so this was during Motor City Pride, this woman, cis female, identifies as female, a little more male presenting. She was like, yeah, of course, I'm wearing a hat. I love the fact, though, that you say I'm a child. Right? But the real story was about this woman, who we had a conversation with her, and she said, well, great. I get the algorithms, but how does DPD issue an arrest warrant? Going back to that little issue, right? Is it about the algorithm that's biased, or is it also about the social systems behind it that exacerbate those issues? Because at a press release or a press conference, this is Mayor Duggan celebrating the addition of 500 extra cameras, Police Chief James Craig behind him. But interestingly, Mr. Nasser Beydoun in the back at the same press conference, who represents the Arab American Civil Rights League, in celebration of the expansion of this program. Because then, who owns a lot of these businesses? Who benefits from having the extra security, despite the biases? And one of my neighbors owns 3 1/3, a kind of a growing local fashion brand. Black man, expanded his business to his 3rd location. Why? Because he felt the security provided by Project Greenlight. So I think for us to think critically about also, too, there are harms that we've identified, but how do we situate ourselves? And for whom are these being served, and who is being targeted? And I think that that answer, when we think about the residents, is much, much more complex. I'll skip that. To really discuss the last bit in my last second. Very briefly talking about that video again. Right? Perhaps the challenge is, it's not that the big tech companies don't train better algorithms to think about sitting. They don't care. It's us in this room who care about the urban AI, the urban definitions. So why have we not created a data set to do that? So although I said I would skip over the data, this is why, for many of you who have had as students, I really press the idea of us being authors, right? There is making better tools. There's us being critical about the tools in the environment, but it's also how do we now put ourselves in a position to reframe the conversations, to really think about what urban AI is. Thank you very much.
I just want to start by thanking the conference organizers for including me in this day of incredible talks. It's been truly an interesting day, you know, as we start to begin to experiment with this new technology. It's fun to see all the things that come out of those experimentations. So thanks so much for bringing us together. My name is Sarah Williams. I am director of the Civic Data Design Lab. I'm also an associate professor of technology and urban planning at MIT, where I also direct the Leventhal Center for Advanced Urban, and too many directing. Since the release of openly available Gen AI systems in early November 2022, the numerous experiments, critiques, and discussions that have emerged after, my research group at MIT developed a multi-year research project that included a conference exhibition, paper, a computer application to critique and understand generative systems as applied to urban environments. So exactly the questions set out in this panel today. I won't be able to show all of them, but I want to just take also a moment to credit that multidisciplinary team that included collaborators from computer science, science, technology, and society, law, media communications, urban planning, urban design, architecture, plus something that I was really interested in including in our team, which were colleagues from the City of Boston's innovation team, led by Santi Garce and Michael Evans, who partnered with us to think of really the practical applications towards cities. Together, we worked to unbox generative AI for cities, and we literally did it in a box. We started our work together through the development of an exhibition. So my research lab believes that one of the most important ways we influence change in the urban environment is through civic debate, and exhibitions provide a great way to have those debates. So the Unboxed City exhibition set out to reveal how generative AI algorithms work by being immersed inside one. So going back to the black box, our team felt that there were many misconceptions about AI, and we wanted to really use the exhibition as a way to teach the public about how it works. The exhibition structure was a large black box, theme of today, a representation that's often associated with the unknown of algorithms. The representation of the box was also meant to illustrate that it is human nature to use technological innovation to control the world from a distance. Take, for example, the widespread use of camera obscura. In the mid-19th century, the tool, which already had a long history of use by astronomers and scientists, became a novelty for seeing, interpreting, and representing urban environments. As was likened to magic, similar to the way in which generative AI has been referred to as magical. A camera obscura is a simple black box where the pinhole opening an image of the outside is projected onto the darkened interior, bounding the urban scene within the confines of the box. What was thought to allow for a more empirical understanding of place, devoid of bias in other senses. So people thought this kind of limiting of how you see it is really helpful. The pinhole has been likened to representing the eye of the box and the mind. From somebody sitting here in the room, a quote from you. Patrick Geddes, an urban planner living and working around this time in the 20th century, believed the camera obscura could serve as a powerful tool for public engagement by presenting visually the complexities of urban life. His installation on top of the Edinburgh Castle provided a live, detailed view of the city, symbolizing the emerging interests using data and technology to understand and imagine environments. Referencing the ways in which Getty discussed the camera obscura, we sought to use the exhibition to start a discussion on how we can have a human dialogue between technology and the public. Could we be more collaborative in the AI system? Could we put people inside the box? While the camera obscura is meant to enhance how we see the world, the idea of the black box has been often associated with applications of cybernetics towards urban post-war urban analytics. And these algorithms have been long disregarded as inaccurate, misleading due to their small data, lack of transparency, and therefore their innate inability to reinforce the beliefs and ideologies of those who curated the data that drove them. And so for many people think that big data has solved this problem, but we know that, in fact, many of these issues still exist. A totem in the center of the box holds 4 large screens playing multi-directional videos illustrating the process of neural networks, collecting, encoding, and decoding data, thereby transforming data into artificial intelligence. Visitors are surrounded by the visual and auditory narrative that reveals the bias and limitations in shaping cities through AI. The black reflective walls of the box interior project real and unreal elements layered in an infinite loop, creating a sensation of what is meant to feel like to be in an algorithm. The infinite reflectivity reminds visitors that what is created through generative AI is not real, but rather impressions of reality. So let me take the opportunity to play the video now because I think it's helpful for the discussion today. And do we have sound? I need sounds.
Our world. Each element individually unique and perceived with the same authenticity and uniqueness of the sensor, human and machine, that perceives it. Developing tools to know the world has been a pursuit of humanity, and throughout history, scholars have noted the data we collect in pursuit of that knowledge allows us to control people, control land, and create power. What we know of the world is that we have chosen to record throughout time language, movies, music, art, fiction, nonfiction, histories, news, censuses. This data is compiled in vast computational libraries to use with generative AI and represents prevailing cultural narratives. What is dominant in the data is what comes to the front of consciousness, both fact and fiction. The digital city is seen through sensors, CCTV, satellites, maps, cell phone traces, GPS, and street photos. This data can be fed into vision recognition, algorithms, creating a way for city objects such as buildings, cars, streets, and vegetation to be detected. The output of these algorithms is limited by their training data and the financial and human resources allocated to curate such data. Often incentivized by monetization, this tagged reality of the world is missing so much. Take, for example, the numerous languages, art, and histories not recorded in our digital world. Here, the power law takes over, a calculation in which the dominant narrative of society overpowers and the nuances of what makes a city are hard to find. Interrogating the data on the long tail of the power law, the data that is missing might just show us where we need to focus our attention. The layers of cities we encode and decode are re-injected into the training data, creating a network of complex relationships. The data is sorted into stacks. As it moves through the network, the algorithm learns the statistical probability of the relationships within. It encodes what an urban street is, the elements it is made of: people, streets, lights, signs, windows, bricks, concrete, cars, buildings, sidewalks, benches, flowers. The decoding process digs deeper. What is the probability of a building having a terrace, the height of its windows, its materiality being brick, concrete, wood, glass, metal? Iteratively decoding the textures, colors, patterns it is given. It's the intricate statistical relationships encompassing a myriad of probabilities that enable the algorithms to craft an image of the city. This embodies the intelligence of generative AI, a memory constructed on statistics rather than intuition. The process creates an infinite reflection as the statistical relationships are folded back into the model. Why then does an out-of-the-box generative AI have a hard time showing a flood-resilient and accessible East Boston? Generative AI algorithms have yet to fully decode what it means to be resilient or accessible. Resilience is an adjective with multiple layered meanings, highly dependent on context. Decoding what it means to be resilient is even hard for the human mind. Given all these statistical relationships, how can we include the human voice and intuition in the model, reflecting people's diverse needs, desires, and dreams? We must create a way for the missing to be represented, to create AI systems that allow for a dialogue between what is unknown in the algorithm and what is known in the world.
The exhibition ends with a call to action, asking us to develop AI models that are not dominated by power, driven by the voice of people representing the diversity and complexity of our world outside the algorithm. The work highlights that urban intelligence of generative AI, like the models that came before, only know what they have encountered in the past, and what they know is never neutral. They are products of power and embody the bias of that power, and struggle with concepts, context, and communities that have been underrepresented within the data. Therefore, to truly use AI systems adequately, they must be including human intelligence. They're only as intelligent as the conversations that we have with them. So we began after the exhibition to look at examples of where we were conversing with AI modes of intelligence. So where are their conversations? Where are their examples of these kind of exchanges? And we found many chatbots, as we heard about today. This one said it was a kind of conversational tool, but again, it's only one-sided. And what I mean by that, the intelligence isn't coming in from the community, it's only being delivered out. So we decided to think about how we could develop a partnership to change the way that we exchange data with cities. And so we partnered with the city of Boston, where Santi Garz had created the first memo in any city about how AI can be used in government, and he's kind of the leader. When generative AI came out last December, he created this memo. He said, this is how we can use it. These are how we can think about the ethics. And so we started to think about how can we use it to have a conversation around civic engagement. Together, we developed workshops between the city and community to think about the ways in which generative AI could be used. And we came up with the idea of small language models, or where models are driven from the input the community and the city put into them, combined with detailed information, statistics, and representation. So how does this work? Let's take Blue Hill Avenue Transportation Action Plan as an example. So this is something that we worked on together with the city. And so Blue Hill Avenue was redesigned recently, and through that design process, we had hundreds of pages of transcripts and community meetings. We had data, we had drawings, we had sketches, we had a lot of information, and we put that all into a model. And we started to ask the model question. Here's one. Who are the biggest complainers in the Blue Hill Avenue plan? Let's see. This is a fun one. It's thinking for a while. But I think one of the things that's interesting to note here is almost everybody's complaining. But also, I love this additional fact at the end. Additionally, during the public meeting, there was a noted tension and conflict between participants, particularly in discussions about the project's virtual meetings, but really kind of representing the plan. So where this is really important is when we have such a massive amounts of qualitative data, we forget how useful these models can be, and it's really useful for governments to be sorting through that data set very quickly. But not only that, here, I'm going to spare you the, is it a video playing? Let's see if it will play. Maybe you have to click it upstairs. Yep, no, it's not playing. Okay, so the video is not playing, but what I'll tell you what goes on is one of the things is that you can bring all this transcript data, and then you can actually ask it to compare it to the quantitative data. So what I said is, how does 311 records relate to some of the data that's happening in the transcripts? And it was able to give me specific points within the transcripts that relates to the data and then relates to an action in the plan. And what's really great about this is for city employees who are trying to explain to their communities how they took action on a project or event. This can be helpful in doing that. Whoops, sorry, I went ahead of. And so the work led us to develop a position paper showing that generative AI can enable new mechanisms for community engagement, allowing residents to transform the information provided by the city in a way that is more relevant or actionable through improved language transition, more accessible summaries of lengthy technical documents, visioning of design in their communities, and search, to name a few improvements. However, our work also showed that these methods have numerous risks: uncertain accuracy, completeness, bias, privacy concerns, and dependent on private sector tools. These risks can further misalign the community and the city government by creating mistrust, which is antithetical to a functioning government. So given this risk, we argue that a successful integration of generative AI for civic engagement can focus on the co-development of these small language models, allowing the voice of the community to be included into the machine. The work has turned into a guidebook for cities on how to use generative AI in civic engagement, how to develop small language models, not just for the types of work that we do to develop new planning documents like the Blue Hill Avenue, but also how we can use it for visioning community design. The guidebook will be released in early December, and we hope that it helps cities learn how to build small language models that are built with community, using their own knowledge and data, and is representative of their values and culture. What's better is these small language models can be owned and maintained by communities themselves, not contributing the data to the larger commercially driven AI systems, but rather retaining ownership over their data only to be accessed by consent. So while these small language models will help in having community representation in the data. And so you can imagine lots of different communities having these small language models. They can connect in, they can opt out, but it helps create this ownership over your data. That's one of the biggest questions that we have within AI systems. So ultimately, can AI learn urban intelligence? I believe it can happen always when it's powered by people and through people and communication. I've gone way over time. There's lots of other projects I would love to show you today, but maybe we can talk about them in the conversation. Thank you. There's
a lot to discuss. That was such a wonderful set of talks. it's a very difficult prompt. I found the prompt actually quite difficult. And I was hoping that maybe the first question that we can discuss is if you can all talk through what are some definitions or ways of thinking about urban intelligence, right? It's a dense term. So how do you think about that term, especially in the context of working with technology or working with AI?
I think, you know, maybe it's not direct to that question, but one thing that I found that I was happy to see across all of our presentations was an interrogation of the results that came about in each of the things we did, in effort to sort of understand things. And I think as we think about the sort of urban intelligence, it really is still human. And I think that so far, you know, from the folks that were here, that it seems that there's a widespread understanding and effort to maintain so. And so I guess sort of my contribution to that question would be that I was happy and a little bit pleasantly surprised to see, you know, that the interrogation is shared by everyone up here.
I think the question of what is intelligence is so important, and I loved Nneka, when you brought that up in your, because I think, you know, we keep calling AI systems or generative AI systems intelligent. They are so not intelligent, or they do not meet the definition of intelligence in my mind, right? They're statistical representations of the probability of one thing being next to another, or, and I think if we can remember that is really beneficial because this helps us with translation of text, and I mean, it can be really useful, and we saw so many great uses for it in the world today, but it's also not intelligence in the way that we think of the ability to contextualize and synthesize an idea within certain kind of contexts. Understanding adjectives are very hard for generative AI, right? In that context. And so I think that's what's so important about also, what do we want an intelligent city to be like? We want to, or what do we want our intelligent government to do? It wants us to help us understand the context. But it can be an aid to our intelligence, right? And it can be helpful in allowing us to make those connections, synthesizing large documents, and helping us build our contextual knowledge.
I think like implicit in our talks across the board, without us necessarily saying it, is there's a certain vision of what the world should look like. It should be resilient. It should be democratic. There should be participation or equal participation, right? And we look at it through different lenses. Because I think like in a way, a good comparison might be, one of the earlier sessions I think was like human AI or AI and human. I think this one was about people and AI. Are students able to have a conversation back in the real world? Are they actually learning? Are they empowered? Are they centered? You know, are they able to kind of work with the government in new ways? Are they even able to understand, or are they seen within the algorithms? And I think that move from human earlier, which, you know, that's not a criticism, it's a different type of framing, to ours really thinking about the so what when it actually hits our lived experiences and our interfaces with each other and with people in power, ultimately, be it capital or government. And I think that there's a nebulousness there of even what our maybe objective metrics are for a great city, but I think we're at least aiming towards a certain vision. And we're struggling and testing ways this AI intelligence is or is not leading us to that future, whatever that future specifically may be.
Yeah, so something I was thinking a lot about, which led me to have my talk the way that I did, was how sometimes we think of intelligence as this monolith. Like, I mean, you can think about it personally. Of some people are like, well, I'm emotionally intelligent. I'm mentally, different types of intelligence. So to me, you know, the big question that I was trying to interrogate is, when we think about intelligence, there are these different textures and layers that are complement to each other. Their context that can help make us make decisions better. Their, efficiency questions are very important, but different from, again, like human sentiment and priorities of people. So I was thinking a lot about trying to just separate and add more texture to like how we're even thinking about intelligence, because it's not just one thing, and we can connect them. Like, how do you want to actually relate those types of intelligence to each other to make decisions?
Yeah. Those are such fantastic answers. I think a common theme that kept coming up was the idea of a black box, right? Or unboxing. I think all of you have used some version of those words. So I actually want to read this audience question that really gets at that idea of trust, or specifically maybe civic trust that also came up in some of the talks. So yeah, this question, it says, many of your talks emphasized on the black box of AI in urban contexts and touched on the role that private entities will adopt in absence of robust regulatory frameworks. What should local governments do to regulate and increase meaningful civic engagement in the use of AI-related technologies that they're not currently doing? And maybe also, if I can just broaden that question a little bit for my own sake, is generally just how do you build trust, right? And what does trust even mean? Is it trust in the process, trust in the outcome? Yeah.
I would love to take that on because it was a key part of the paper, but also Nneka brought it up a lot in her talk as well, because at the heart of a functioning government is trust, right? That we must trust our government to pick up the trash or do these other things. And I think one of the things that's really hard with generative AI, first for government, is the lack of trusting what's coming back from the data set. And one of the biggest things that we found in our study is that communities, groups, or even governments were really interested in using generative AI, but they couldn't trust that the information is coming back. And that's where I think this dialogue between how we are developing the models, and I know we heard this again and again today, but how do we build trust? It's through sustained and consistent action, right? And I think with AI, it's right now, of course, flaky, hallucinates, it doesn't have sustained and consistent reaction. But if it's done with a contextualizing of our government and explaining and being transparent about the outcomes as we use it together, that can build trust. And so as one of the things that I think of, but I also think that this trust is such a big issue that if we can create and embed within many of the products, understanding of how trustworthy the outcome is, that would be a really huge help in kind of the use of AI and more of a public conversation.
I want to add on to what you were saying too, because I also agree that trust is really based on sustained engagement. And I think expanding onto that, it's actually about meeting people where they are. That's something we hear a lot, but really being intentional about, are people actually curious to learn about algorithms through Instagram? Are they like coming to City Hall to ask questions? So really being intentional of like, how do you reduce the barrier to like actually foster connection with folks who might maybe be skeptical about government? And then another thing too that that hits close to home being in government right now is, we want obviously more transparent government, and we want to be able to say that, yes, that feedback that you gave is actually what's happening in the city, but sometimes it's more complicated than that. So I think it's actually an opportunity to like open up the process to just let people know like what's next, or at least like immediately we heard you and this is kind of where it's going in government, but to not promise that we actually, like we may not be able to promise that we're going to be able to act on those changes, but I think trust doesn't have to be always about like saying exactly what you like what people want, but I think it's more about letting people into your process and like keeping them engaged along the way so that they can see like the transformation that's happening.
Was that sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think where we don't have trust in government or in our leaders is that I feel that you always build trust, same way you build trust with your students, is owning when you make a mistake. And that's why people don't trust people in authority, is because they, the user or, the recipient of anything, as especially as a participant in society, you receive so much from government and you give. But if people aren't honest with you about what was done right and what was done wrong, when they say the next thing to you, you're not going to believe them. So I think as we think about this technology and its integration, there are probably going to be many successes, but it's also important to be honest about those failures. And I think it's also important for the public to not overly criticize when someone does make a mistake, because I think in today's day and age, people are afraid to say what they did wrong because they don't want it to be used against them. They don't want it to be repeated, and that sort of fear of honesty, I think, is actually what creates a lot of distrust.
I think for me, there's an anecdote that sticks out in my head, and I've told my students this because it's one that like sticks with me. And one of the hats I wear is I'm part of the Center for Smart Streetscapes, which is across Columbia in partnership with New York City, New Brunswick, cities in Florida, Rutgers, Florida Atlantic, a big constellation of parties thinking about all this technology for future streets. And in Harlem and on the corner of 120th and Amsterdam, Columbia has built out a beyond 5G network capable infrastructure to do this amazing testing for new technology. And part of the research is to have meetings with the community. Like there is a group that meets with us regularly that the community selects. So we're trying to build trust. But as one of the meetings I was at with the community board's public safety committee, and she said to me, "We don't trust Columbia." And I was like, "I don't blame you. Just be honest, right? Like when did we last talk to you?" So that's one bit of trust. But then she said something that I think, going back to Nneka's point of meeting people where they are, and she said, "You're talking about beyond 5G capability. I'm afraid of 5G." And I was worried, like, oh my gosh, like, are we talking about like, things in the vaccines? Where are we going with this? Like, I don't know, right? Because no one's ever actually explained to her what 5G is. And she's worried about the radio signals. Is it going to cause cancer? And I could only explain what I know, which is, it's radio frequency that we've allocated. But I see your point. I don't tend to talk with my phone next to my head for hours in the same way that I don't sit next to the microwave when it's on. I don't know. Like the science may say it's safe, but it's just, I don't want to have a radio next to my head. But then our conversation moved to the point of, well, then why is there a 5G tower out my window? I don't know. It's a Link NYC totem. I have no idea how Link NYC made that decision. And now we're talking about the larger social systems, right? That never brought them in. So how is she going to trust the technology? She doesn't necessarily know what it is. I don't blame her. She doesn't know why there's a tower outside her window. I don't either. I don't blame her. And now we're talking about a test bed for new capabilities, and we're bringing her in now. How is she supposed to trust us as Columbia? How is she supposed to trust New York City? How is she supposed to trust Link NYC? Or the technologies when no one has brought the residents who are supposed to benefit from this into that conversation. And I think that's where there is an education part, but it's not us talking at people, right? People have fears. And we're fighting against a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there. So how do we have that conversation, and how do we do it with them, finding those places where that conversation can happen? And I think that's hard. That's incredibly hard.
Thank you. We're almost at time, but I really do want to ask this one last question and just maybe turn the sentiment ship around a little bit, because it's a really optimistic question. The question says, can you share if there's any engagement effort with AI tools that are successful, maybe outside of your own work?
I mean, one of the things that I found from the study that was incredible is just the ability to translate information through different languages, but also different coding languages, really makes things a lot more accessible. for cities, and I think it's absolutely an incredible tool for cities that have 5 different languages to account for. I also want to talk about qualitative data. We never talk about it. It is so good at searching through qualitative data. And so much of what we do in urbanism and cities is have conversations with communities, have conversations with the public. There are so many tools right now that allow you to summarize those transcripts and then pinpoint in exactly where in that transcript somebody said something if you wanted to go back to it. I think this is a huge benefit in multiple fields. And then, because it has that ability to go through qualitative data so easily, we can connect it back to the quantitative data that we have. And one of these things is how bringing qualitative and quantitative data together has always been such a hard thing to do. I want to just talk about the success of that ability.
Mine is short and sweet, but Sarah, I'm really crushing on people-powered AI, so I'm gonna put in a reminder on my phone for December 1 to get the manual. But I also underscore like qualitative data is important, but your development of a community feedback model and actually making that easier for other government or like other teams to do that is really, really exciting.
Thanks.
You.
Yeah, and I just presented at Harvard 2 days ago to a group of, the Bloomberg Mayors Association, and everybody was super excited about the idea also of being able to ask questions of these large documents within internal questions, right? But anyways, yeah, I'm super excited about people-powered AI. Hopefully we can all power these AI systems. Thank you.
From what I've seen, especially in some of the qualitative outputs, is that I feel I think one thing AI can do is a lot of idea stimulation. So when we study, even within our own disciplines, there's a lot of travel associated because you want to get inspiration for whatever you're going to decide to study or practice or design, et cetera. And I think AI, sometimes, being an academic, you spend so much time by yourself, you just want another voice that maybe just gets you to talk out your thoughts and help frame them and put them on paper. And I think that AI is very helpful to do so. I think, especially with community engagement and the way that we administer and run our cities, it can also be a good platform to maybe add in the bit of the discussion, so long as we, still take the time to understand how, AI collects this data. That's why I was very inspired by when you were talking about, who owns it, whether it's a local group that, can opt in and out of things, because if you think about the people who have an overarching influence on our society, you look at like Apple or Meta, they control so much of our daily interaction, and they can just slightly move the scale if you have any, potential corruption of those voices. So I really like the democratization fact of that, and I think as long as we can continue to add that, it can be productive.
Well, thank you all so much for your deep and thoughtful engagement with this very difficult prompt. I've learned so much from all of you, and I'm sure our audience has as well. Thank you.